Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today, well, I was going to rant about the comics that I bought this week because I just bought comics. I didn't actually flip through them or looked at who wrote them or anything else. I bought $50 worth of new comics, which I usually buy $50 worth of old comics. And I took them home and I read them, and I was just going to rant on that. Now, I'm going to probably rant on that at the end of this video. But I came to a conclusion after reading these horrible new comics. And it's the simple fact that the people who write these comics, and I would lump also in with that the people who make these comics no matter what they do, and the people who make modern entertainment no matter what kind of entertainment you're into, whether it's novels or tabletop gaming or movies or television or whatever, these people, especially the ones who write the stories, are just plain stupid people. Now, I know that might not be a big revelation to many of you. I've certainly thought it every once in a while myself, but really, I think now that's just the end-all and be-all of what they are. They're low-intelligent, stupid people. And that's it. And I want to talk about that and how it affects the way they tell a quote-unquote story and go over the finer points of everything within that. But before I do any of that, I'm going to have to put in a whole bunch of qualifiers and define some of my terms. First off, one of the reasons why I've never said this before is because I try to concentrate on things logically and rationally, and as such, I don't want to be perceived as making a non-rational argument, something that's either based on an ad hominem attack, where I attack the person rather than their argument, or a genetic fallacy, or any of these kinds of things which are not rational. But I am following a rational set of propositions here. What I am saying is that these people who are writing these stories are of such low intelligence that they do not have the ability to produce what is actually a good story. And further to that their quote-unquote progressive ideology is the thing that deliberately makes them stupid. Secondly, I'm not claiming that smart people are good people and stupid people are bad people. No, not at all. I know that there are plenty of people who are not very intelligent, who are some of the best people you're ever going to meet. And there are some very intelligent people who are the worst people in the world. No, intelligence is, although it is considered a virtue, it's considered an intellectual virtue. Obviously, intelligence, intellectual virtue. An intellectual virtue is not a true virtue. It's something that is good, but is not like the true virtues of prudence, justice, temperance, fortitude. Those virtues which, if you use them properly, according to how they exist in reality, they will never lead you to anything evil. But no, you can be intelligent, and your intelligence can lead you to an evil place. So again, not claiming that just because you have low intelligence, you're not a good person. Not at all. And vice versa. However, I will say the following. I'm not someone who just accepts the idea or the axiom that never attribute to malice what can be attributed to stupidity. For my own part, I would say those two things can overlap. They're not mutually exclusive. Now, most people, I think, would see them as mutually exclusive because they would say, well, you can't have malice unless you deliberately do something, and you're not deliberately doing something if you're stupid and you don't know what you're doing. Well, I would say yes and no. If the reason why you're stupid is because you deliberately ignore all of the signs pointing you in the other direction, then yeah, that deliberate turning away from what you know is actually real and becoming stupid that way, and then doing something wrong, that's deliberate malice. Therefore, you're both being malicious, deliberately malicious, and ignorant at the same time. And lastly, I'll have to say what I usually say about every 6 to 8 months. I'm not a smart person. Please do not consider me to be a smart person. Hopefully I'm not a stupid person, but if you want to think of me that way, you go right ahead, because I do not consider myself a smart person. Quite honestly, when I was younger, I took something which was kind of like an IQ test. It might have been, I'm not entirely sure. And they wanted to hold me back in my school. They actually put me in a slow class. Although I don't think I was slow. I think I was just lazy, and that just gave me the incentive not to be lazy anymore. But anyway, and on top of that, I'm not an authority on anything. I'm not some beacon of truth. Please do not think of me that way. I'm just throwing out ideas. But let's start there. Let's start with IQ. Now, part of the reason why I'm talking about this is because Richard Meyer over at Comics Matter was calling, who was it? I think it was Veda Ayala, as someone who had mental deficiency. He really thought she had mental deficiency for about, 2 months. He was going on about it. And then people who he knows in the comic industry that know her and know him came back to him and said, no, she really doesn't have a mental deficiency. She's just not very creative at all. And I would say, if you have someone who's not very creative in a creative position and they believe that they belong there, then yeah, they're a stupid person. Now, I'll get into that in a minute. Again, we'll go back to IQ. Now, IQ is something which, when I did a little bit of research for this video, I realized that didn't exist until I think it was the early 1900s. And when they came up with the scale of IQ, they also came up with the scale and terms for people who are very low IQ. And those three terms, if I can remember correctly, are idiot, imbecile, and moron. And yes, those are the technical terms. But without getting very technical about their definition, here's the basic definition. Someone who's an idiot is someone whose intelligence is that of a 2-year-old or below and can never get above that. Someone who's an imbecile is someone who has an intelligence that is more than a 2-year-old but less than a 7-year-old. And a person who's a moron is someone who has an intelligence which is more than a 7-year-old but less than a 12-year-old. Now, I would say these people who write modern comics and a lot of the people who write modern entertainment and a lot of the people who run these industries are very close to being morons. They have the intelligence level of a 12 to 14-year-old. But here's the thing, as I previously mentioned, these scales, I would say, would be directed towards people who have a physical or mental block that they can't progress beyond that level of intelligence. And that's what these names were meant to signify for people. But the people that I'm looking at, they're not people that have any kind of mental deficiency in order to keep them at the level of a 12 to 14-year-old in intelligence. No, they are deliberately this way because of their choices, because of their lives, and because of their adherence to their quote-unquote progressive ideology. Which is just a long way of saying that they're stupid. Because I went through some psychological magazines and articles and things like that, and where they discussed what makes a person stupid. Well, what they typically discuss is that a person is stupid when they believe that they can do a thing that they quite obviously cannot do. And when I mean quite obviously, I mean, and I'm sure we've all heard this line sometime in our lives, they should know better. That is to say, just by plain common sense, or just the normal experiences of a human being, they should know that they don't have the ability to do this thing, but they try and do it anyways. And thus, they're being stupid. And so we go back to Richard and his discussion of Veda Ayala, and him saying she must have some kind of mental deficiency, and other people saying, no, she's just not very creative. Well, if she's not very creative, and she's being put into a position where she needs to create things, she should know better than to think that she can accomplish the thing that she's doing. And since she doesn't, she's being stupid. Something should tell her, just from normal experience and common sense, that she's not doing a good job. If you looked at any of the traditional earmarks of whether or not you're being successful, they're simply not there. Whether you look at sales numbers, or feedback from your audience, or whether or not your characters have any kind of staying power, or whether or not you've progressed any as a writer. Because quite honestly, this woman, after writing for Marvel Comics for a number of years now, with hundreds of titles under her belt, is now just learning how to write up an outline for the story that she's creating. If you look at any of these, you should know that you are not in the right business. Now, I realize that the people in the comic industry are very much blowing smoke up the skirts of these people who create comics. Definitely, I've gone over this in video after video. Usually it's at a Comic-Con panel where they have a bunch of creators from Marvel sitting in a line facing an audience, and they tell them things like, when the VP who basically ran Marvel Comics saying, you can't just look at the sales numbers of these books. Or in another panel saying, well, you have to make sure that all of those people out there who are negative and don't have anything good to say about your book, you have to make sure that you shut all of those voices out. Or calling them, in one podcast that I covered, calling them the next great writers for Marvel because they don't follow traditional storytelling norms. So Marvel is blowing smoke up the skirts of these people, is trying to deceive these people and tell them this lie. But I'm sorry, you live in reality. If you don't understand that you cannot do this job after so many years of failing at it so spectacularly, it's because you're turning a blind eye to the reality that is right around you. That is to say, you're convincing yourself of that lie. Now, that brings me to a point where I want to talk about the traditional way that you would look at somebody who is intelligent and not intelligent. I'm saying the Western civilization way of looking at this, and show how all of what I'm just talking about fits into this dynamic of intelligence and lack thereof. And it all starts with that idea of what is a lie. Really, in Western civilization, what is a lie? Well, a lie is something that you are saying which is not in accord with reality. And I like Augustine of Hippo's really simple test for whether or not it's a lie that he came up with in about, 400 AD. He said, you're a person. A person always acts in their own self-interest. So, if you do something to act in your own self-interest, you believe that it's going to turn out well for you. And when you do that thing and it does not turn out well for you, then obviously you have some false information that you're proceeding upon. That is to say, you're proceeding upon a lie. So basically, by applying what you think to reality and seeing how it plays out in your own life, whether or not what you're living according to is a lie or not. Whether or not you suffer or you actually come out better at the end of using that information that you actually have about life. And this is what it all comes down to. It's a lie if it's opposed to the truth. It is a lie if it is opposed to reality, which itself is based upon the principles of truth. And this leads into what you would consider someone as being intelligent. Because someone who is intelligent is really reflecting a position that is the position of the truth. And it leads into something that I want to discuss right here. It's the fact that if you look at any of the major ways of looking at the truth throughout Western civilization, if you look at it through a Christian norm of God, or if you go back to Aristotelian idea of the prime mover, or if you go back to Plato and his idea of the good, any of these, if you look at the position of the thing that is true, what is that position? That position is the position that allows the true, the good, to see everything that is good at the same time. Or in another way, to see all points of view that are good. Now you'll notice I say all points of view that are good. It's not all points of view, because some points of view are not good. Some points of view are opposed to what is good. You cannot see those things from the position of the truth, because those are positions of a lie. From the position of the truth, you can see every last thing from every position that is true. That is, multiple positions of the truth. But what is opposed to that? What is a lie? A lie is based upon the idea that, of course, nothing that exists is anything but good. Again, this is not just a Christian idea, but it's very much a Christian idea that when everything was created, God sat back and said, it is good, so everything is good. Evil itself does not exist. Evil is something that exists as an opposition to truth, as a turning of your back to what is true. So the position of what is false, the position of a lie, is simply the position of being opposed to what is true. And the very keen difference between those two positions is that in the position of the truth, you get to see from multiple perspectives of what is true. But the position of a lie is only one position and one position only. And that position is opposed to the truth. That's it. This is a key difference. And it's a key difference within intellect as well. Because if we look at intelligence, again, intelligence is trying to reflect that position of the truth. That is to say, to see from those multiple positions of truth as many as possible as you can, all at one time. And this goes right back to the nature of how we as human beings learn something. The traditional way that they viewed human beings and how they learned was, what you do is, as an individual, You take one thing that you know that is true, and you add it to another thing that you know that is true. And from that combination, you then generate a third thing that is true that you did not know before, but you now know. And so you see, the process of learning itself and becoming intelligent is a process whereby you need to understand what is true from, at the very least, two positions to begin with, and then you add a third. And then you continue on and on to add more and more of these positions from the truth that you can see from. And therefore, you see things from multiple positions. Being able to see from multiple positions of what is true is what intelligence is. And so, if we look at someone who is not intelligent, who is the opposite of intelligent, if we look at someone who is stupid, it's quite the opposite. What they are doing is they are placing themselves within one singular position, and they are judging everything according to that one singular position. And that one singular position is the position that is opposed to the truth. And what is that position? What does it look like? How is it defined within Western civilization? Well, again, throughout Western civilization, for, at least 2,400 years now, it's been defined over and over again by multiple people in the same way. It's the position of selfishness. It's the position, if you look at it through Christian terms, it's the position of pride. Pride being the mother of all sin. You see, when you are prideful, you're saying, I know better than God. I know better than the truth. Therefore, everything is judged according to me. The same thing is said by Aristotle when he talks about you have to make yourself a friend of the truth if you want anything to work out for you. Or if you go back to Plato, his teacher, who said quite specifically, when you judge everything according to yourself and not according to what is true, this is, as he says, the greatest of evils. And so that brings me back to my point. My point about the fact that these people, yes, they're being malicious, even though they're ignorant at the same time. Why? Because they're placing themselves in a position of ignorance, deliberately placing themselves in that position of ignorance, and then doing malicious things from there. So yeah, they're malicious and ignorant at the same time. And I'm sure that more than one of you, as I have been speaking, have already picked out the fact that this position, this selfish position of I judge everything from this one position, which is my position, is the position of your quote-unquote progressive ideology. Because for them, and really not just them, many more, but really they are the ones that we're concentrating on today because they're the ones who are trying to take over everything, especially our entertainment. They're the ones who constantly say, there is no such thing as truth, there's only my truth. There is no such thing as reality, there's only my reality. That's why they make statements like that Smithsonian article that I always quote, where they say reason and logic are things that need to be abandoned because they're part of whiteness. Why would you have to abandon these things when they lead you to the truth? It's because they don't believe in the truth. There's only my truth. They don't believe in reality. There's only my reality. This is why these people believe that others can define reality by how they feel. They can say, I am this or that by the reality of how I feel, because there's only my reality, not actual reality. When they say any and all of these things, they're simply going back to that one position of being opposed to the truth and saying, I judge everything from this one position, and this one position is the selfish position of me judging everything according to myself. And this, of course, is ultimately ironic, because these quote-unquote progressive people always paint themselves as being the ones who see from multiple positions. They always paint themselves as being the tolerant ones. They always paint themselves as being the ones who embrace a diversity of things. They're not. They're quite the opposite. That's why I call them quote-unquote progressives, because those are scare quotes. Those are me saying they are quite the opposite of progressive. They're regressive. And everything they say is the opposite of what they do. They do not want anyone to look at things from multiple positions. They want everyone to look at it from their one singular position, and that's it. You're only allowed to have one position and one way to look at things. It's their way, and if you don't do it that way, you get attacked by them. And to bring it back to entertainment, and specifically storytelling, writing a good story, this is exactly the thing that I'm talking about. A couple of years ago, when I was going over podcast after podcast from Marvel, they kept on saying, if you ever want to write for Marvel, you have to have a unique voice. They said this over and over again. But it's quite the opposite. They're not looking for anyone unique. They're not looking for a unique voice at all. They're looking for the one singular voice that can parrot exactly what they are saying themselves. They're simply looking for someone who can describe in another way the exact same falsehood that they themselves are peddling. They're saying, hey, look, from this position that I'm the same as you, I can look out and judge this other thing which no one else has judged before according to this one position. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for one singular voice. And this is exactly what you get in this type of entertainment. Again, with comics, you look at someone like Veda Ayala, who said, quite specifically said, in an interview, that when she writes dialogue, she just figures out what she herself would say in this position. But she's doing that for every character. That means that every character has the one singular voice. I'm sorry, but this is one of the things that drives me insane. Why? Because I love to write dialogue. Sometimes when I'm writing a story, I just write page after page of dialogue, and then I fill in the rest later. Dialogue writing is one of my passions, and I make sure that everybody has a unique voice. I look at what I have written and I say, if I can take this statement and put it in the mouth of someone else, then it is not supposed to be there. Rewrite it, make it better. It has to be something that they themselves and only they themselves can say. If it's not, then I'm not writing good dialogue. For example, right now, I'm writing a side story to the main book of my graphic novel, which is THOMAS VALIANT, which, by the way, if you missed the original campaign for that and you still would like a copy of my graphic novel, which is a superhero throwback to the great hero stories of the 80s and 90s, well, you can order one directly through me. My email is in the description of this video. Just contact me through my email. But what I'm doing right now is I'm writing a side story to that main story. And also, by the way, what I'm planning to do with these smaller side stories is to publish them on a member section of this YouTube channel where, yes, you'll have to pay a small subscription every month in order to become a member, and then you'll be able to see these side stories that I will give pages for every week or 2 weeks, depending on how many I'm going to be producing at one time. But anyways, that's just for the future, hopefully the near future. But my point being, I'm writing this side story with these two characters, which are Pulse and Feral. And Pulse is a guy who's been around for a long time. He's old. He's at least 100 years old. You'll know this if you read my story, or more accurately, got the cards with the original story that it came with. But anyways, the point is that he's very old, and he's also been in the military for a long time. And so, when I write his dialogue, he has a very specific voice. I'm always looking up slang from other decades, from the 50s or 40s or 30s, saying, how would this person who has lived this long actually speak? And also, I need some military jargon, so I go to my brother and I say, how would someone say this? Because he's military. So I combine those two things together and it gives him a very unique voice. And that's the way I treat all of my dialogue. Everyone has to have a unique voice. And I can do that because that's the way a story is supposed to be told. A story is supposed to be a reflection of reality. Reality is based upon the truth. The truth is to see things that are true from multiple perspectives. And so your story, which is a rhetorical argument, a reflection of reality, should have multiple positions coming from multiple perspectives, from multiple characters, and each of them should have something unique to say. That is, each of them should have a unique voice and speak in that unique voice so that they, as part of the story, can explore that rhetorical argument that you're presenting as a reflection of reality. But no, these people, they have to put in one singular voice. There's only one position for these quote-unquote progressive people, and so every character speaks in one way. Even the villains speak in the exact same way, and I'll get into that, although they do make these so-called villains, which are basically the bullies in some of their stories, which is just a straw man part of an argument. It's not a reflection of reality at all. It's just a counter-reflection of their own insecurities in that one position. That's it. And again, this happens over and over again. When I was covering that podcast where the woman, I'm not entirely sure who it was, that was writing Thanos, this was about 2 years ago, she said, whenever I write Thanos, in those moments, Thanos is queer and brown. Why? Because she herself is queer and brown. Therefore, Thanos is her. Therefore, the voice of Thanos is her voice. She can't write in any other way. When you look at Cena Grace, when he wrote Iceman, this Iceman is not the same Iceman that you saw for 40 years or 50 years prior to that. This Iceman is just Cena Grace, which was just compounded by the fact that after writing 3 series for this character, he laughed at the fact that he still didn't know the basics about the character. He doesn't need to know because he's just writing himself. Critical Thinking, which is a good channel that I listen to, just did a video about this new character that's coming into Archie Comics, written by a woman, I think her name is Lee Thompson or something like that, and she's writing this character who is a female, black, queer, handicapped person. Why? Because that's what she is. And so she's writing herself into the Archie stories. And again, why? Because they can't write anything except the one position, and that one position is themselves. Everything that they see, everything that they encounter is judged by the standard of me. That's it. And I could go on and on with these examples of these writers, but let me just bring in those books that I bought this week and go on about those, because 2 of those stories were stories that weren't from Marvel or DC. So this is for the entire comic industry, not just for Marvel and DC. They were Death Dealer and Bleat and Valeria. By the way, I treat my comics really well. I never get rid of a comic because that would mean throwing it away, and I don't want to treat a comic like that. But that Bleat and Valeria comic, yes, I know I'm probably not pronouncing it right, but that comic, I threw it in the garbage. Why? Because I don't want to soil the rest of my collection with that piece of garbage. But the thing being that within both of these stories, these are both from 2 different publishers, about 2 completely different stories, but they're supposed to be both set in a fantasy world, or at the very least, the Valeria one is supposed to be set in the fantasy world of about 10,000 BC of our time, a time that we don't know about. And the thing being that both of these books had dialogue in them where the people in them are speaking in a way that people would talk today. And not just people who would talk today, but the way I would say the writer would talk today. There was a whole bunch of, oh, I'm being so edgy by putting in this foul-mouthed character and every one of them is foul-mouthed and everything else like that. I'm thinking to myself, no, you're being stupid. Because you're writing from one perspective, and that's the perspective of you. You're writing a fantasy story, one at the very least, which was, again, over 10,000 years ago in our own history. I can write someone from the 60s or 70s that needs to have a unique voice because they spoke in a unique way. But no, these people believe that one voice is all they need for all the characters. Another one that I picked up was the new Ghost Rider, because I thought I liked the last series that they came out with. This one might be the same. I didn't look at it. I picked it up. And what do I get? I get one voice, the voice of Johnny Blaze, and that's it. The entire story is told through him and how he sees things. Now, there are a couple of little things that the writer had to put in there to move the story along. There's a part where Johnny Blaze doesn't know what's going on. It's just the villains of this story. You have, I think, 2 pages of them meeting and saying obscure things, and that's it. The other one being the fact that Johnny Blaze turns into Ghost Rider, and so he does know what Ghost Rider is doing for the first couple of seconds, and then it cuts to black. And then you get Johnny Blaze. After all the action was supposed to happen, the entire thing, all of the action for this book was cut out. Why? Because they have one singular voice. It's the voice of Johnny Blaze, and that's it. I know that if you have a story that is concentrated on one character, sure, you can do this, but there is no one even that speaks to this character except for one crazy guy who makes absolutely no sense. And again, the whole thing is that what this writer is doing is they're placing themselves in the position of Johnny Blaze, and therefore they're just telling the story according to their own position. And that's it. It was stupid. Another one that I picked up was the new Amazing Spider-Man that they rebooted. I figured I would give John Romita Jr. one more chance to see if I was being hard on him when I looked at his cover for one of these books and just slammed it into the ground. No, I'm not. He is doing some of the worst work I've ever seen him do. But that work was spectacular compared to the story. Again, there was no action in this book whatsoever. The entire story was Spider-Man being chained up by Tombstone. The only thing that actually happened as action was Tombstone punched him in the gut once. That's it. The rest of the entire story is Tombstone talking about why Spider-Man should see his point of view as a villain, why he's a villain, and why he should be a villain. All it is a justification of his villainy. And again, I just have to say, this is the exact same thing that I've just been talking about. It's that position of evil. They're trying to excuse that position of evil by having the entire story revolve around the one position that they themselves have and that they themselves give over to these villains and try to make them human. Again, that was one of the things that they covered in that Future Great Writers for Marvel podcast. All of those writers agreed that, yeah, we like to write villains more than heroes. Why? Because they can't see anything from the position of hero. They only have the position of villain, and so that's what they write. And that's where I'm going to end off with this. Because, you see, they can't write an actual hero. That's why the things that they write, when they try to write a hero, they turn out to be villainous. Why? Because they can't see. These writers, they cannot see from any position except from that one, quote unquote, progressive position. And that progressive position is the position of villainy. It is the opposite of self-sacrifice. It is self-indulgence. It is, I am the controller of everything, and everything is judged according to me. This is the exact opposite position of what a hero actually is. Therefore, they cannot write a hero. Or, to put it in the terms that Plato himself stated, this position whereby these writers write from, whereby they create these characters and side characters and entire stories. This one position is the position of selfishness. It is the position whereby the individual judges everything by themselves rather than what is true. That is to say, it is the position of the greatest of evils. And why in the world would anyone voluntarily keep themselves in this position of the greatest evil? Well, it is quite simply because of their own self-inflicted stupidity. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.